I woke in the stillness of a quiet American night, feeling a strange pull in the air, as if something heavy and unseen was waiting outside my door. The town where I lived had always been peaceful, with wide open streets, old maple trees, and neighbors who waved even when they were busy with their own worries. But that night something felt different, something colder, something that pressed against my chest and whispered that my world was about to change in a way I could never undo. I pushed myself up from my bed, my bones stiff from age and the years of working double shifts in diners that smelled like coffee steam and worn-out dreams. The old wooden floor creaked beneath my feet as I moved, and for a moment I wondered if the sound I heard earlier was just my house settling the way it always did before dawn. Then the noise came again, a slow dragging thump, like something or someone moving across the porch boards with an intention that made my breath grow tight. I walked toward the hallway, the weak yellow light from the street lamps slipping through the window and casting long shadows across the walls. My mind rushed through every memory of my daughter Emily, from her first steps to her first heartbreak to the night she left home angry and hurt, blaming me for a life she said was too small for her dreams. Years had passed since we last spoke, except for short uneasy calls on holidays, when her voice sounded distant and full of unspoken storms. Her husband Luke was a man I had never trusted, cold eyes, quick temper, cruel laugh, a man who carried trouble like a shadow that never left him. As I moved closer, my heart beat louder than the strange sound outside, and I tried to convince myself this was nothing more than an animal or maybe a fallen branch scraping the front door. But the moment I reached the entrance, I felt it in my bones, the truth that something was waiting, something tied to my past and my mistakes and my love for a daughter who had grown into someone I barely recognized. The porch light flickered through the small window, and the night wind carried the distant sound of a freight train rolling across the tracks on the edge of town. I hesitated, my hand hovering above the knob, wondering if opening the door would change the rest of my life in ways I could never take back. But I was a mother, and mothers open doors even when fear whispers to leave them shut. I pulled the door, and the sight froze my breath. Emily standing on the porch, her hair wild, her eyes too bright and strange, and beside her Luke gripping an axe, the metal head glinting under the weak light. My legs trembled as I tried to understand the image before me, daughter and son-in-law standing in the dark with a tool meant for chopping wood, but held like something far more dangerous. Emily looked at me with a mix of anger, grief, and something else, something unreadable that burned deeper than the night itself. Luke said nothing, his jaw set, his shoulders tense, the axe shifting slightly in his hands, as if he was waiting for a signal or maybe a moment to release whatever storm simmered inside him. The cold air wrapped around me, and I felt the years of silence between us heavy like stones on my chest. I opened my mouth to speak, but no words came, only the realization that the past I had run from was now standing on my porch carrying steel and fury. And I knew in that moment that the night was far from over, and everything I thought I understood about my daughter, my family, and myself was about to unravel in a way I could never have imagined. The cold wind slipped into the house as they stood there on my porch, and for a moment I wondered if this was truly my daughter or only the shadow of the girl I once raised in a small town where summer fairs and long drives felt like the whole world. Emily stared at me with a look that carried years of distance and hurt, the kind that grows quietly in the corners of a heart until it becomes something sharp enough to cut through anything, even blood ties. Her hand shook slightly, like she had been crying or fighting or running from something I could not see, and the night pressed around us as if it wanted to swallow the truth before any of us spoke it. Luke held the axe with a grip that made my skin crawl, but his eyes were colder than the metal, as if he had already made his decision, and nothing I said would move him from whatever plan he carried. I wanted to reach for my daughter, to pull her inside, to protect her the way I used to when storms rolled through the valley and she would run to my bed afraid of thunder, but this storm was different, and I did not know how to calm it. Emily took a shaky breath and stepped forward, but Luke placed his arm in front of her as if he owned her body, her choices, her words, and the sight made something deep in my chest ache with a familiar old pain. I remembered the day she brought him home years ago, his smile too easy, his charm too thick, and the way he watched everything around him like he was measuring the world for weakness and opportunity. I told her he was trouble, but she said I was judgmental. She said I never wanted her to grow. She said I wanted her life to stay small like mine, and she walked out that night, slamming the door behind her. Time passed like a slow river carving through stone, and every holiday call grew shorter, quieter, colder, until someday it felt like talking to a stranger who carried a voice I used to know. Now she stood before me, her face pale, like something had drained the warmth from her soul, and the air between us felt like thin glass ready to shatter. Luke finally spoke, his voice low like gravel sliding across the ground, and he said, "We need to come inside. We don't have time to explain out here." Every instinct in me screamed to run, to close the door, to call for help, but Emily looked at me with eyes that held a desperate plea, and I knew she needed something she could not ask for out loud. The moonlight caught the blade of the axe, and for a moment I wondered if they were here to hurt me, or if they were running from someone far worse than anything I could imagine. I stepped aside slowly, my breath trembling in my throat, and let them enter my house, the house I had built with years of overtime shifts and lonely nights and stubborn hope that someday my daughter would return to me without fear or anger. The floor creaked under their boots as they walked in, and the tension followed them like a storm cloud, heavy and charged with something dangerous and unspoken. Emily glanced around the living room, the familiar furniture, the faded photos on the wall, the memories she once shared before life twisted her into someone I barely recognized. She whispered something to Luke, too soft for me to hear, and he nodded, tightening his grip on the axe like he expected something to burst from the shadows at any moment. I closed the front door, and the sound echoed like a final warning that whatever was happening tonight was sealed inside with us. The house felt smaller, darker, like the walls were listening, and the memories hanging on them were holding their breath. Emily finally met my eyes, and in her gaze I saw something raw and trembling, like a truth she had been carrying for far too long. She took a step toward me, her voice barely above a whisper, as she said, "Mom, something happened, and we need your help, and we don't know who else to trust." Her words cracked something open inside me, something old and buried and painful, because after all the years of distance she had come back to me not with love or peace, but with fear that filled every corner of the room. And as I looked at her and then at the axe in Luke's hands, I realized I was stepping into a story far darker than anything I had lived before, a story that would force me to confront truths I had spent years hiding from. The night outside grew quieter, as if it too was waiting to hear what came next, and I felt a chill move through the room as Emily drew in a deep breath, ready to reveal the reason they had come. Emily stood in the dim light of the old living room, her shoulders trembling as if every memory of her life had gathered inside her and weighed her down, so heavy she could barely breathe. The clock on the wall ticked slow and loud, each second stretching like it was trying to warn us that whatever truth she was about to speak would change our lives in a way no one could reverse. I watched her hands shake the way they used to when she was a child, holding a broken toy or a secret she was too scared to share, and in that moment she looked fragile in a way I had not seen in years. Luke paced near the window, lifting the axe slightly, then lowering it again, like a man who did not know what to do with his fear, or maybe a man trying to keep control over something he did not fully understand. Emily finally lifted her eyes, and the pain in them was deeper than anger, deeper than guilt. It was the kind of pain that comes from living with the wrong truth for far too long. She took a breath, one that seemed to scrape against her ribs, and said, "Mom, we are in danger, and we don't have anywhere else to go, and we don't know who is watching us." Her voice cracked on the last word, and Luke turned sharply, his eyes sweeping the room as if expecting someone to rise out of the shadows and attack us right there. I felt my stomach twist, fear creeping into the edges of my mind, but a mother's instinct took over, pushing back the panic, reminding me that my daughter was here in front of me, needing protection, needing answers, needing me. I moved closer to her, gently touching her arm, and she flinched slightly as if she had forgotten what comfort felt like, and that small movement broke something inside me. She whispered, "Mom, something bad happened back at our house, something terrible, and we didn't know who else to trust, so we came here because you are the only person who ever tried to keep me safe." Her words hit me with the force of years of silence unraveling all at once, and I wanted to hold her, but Luke stepped between us, his shoulders stiff, his jaw tight, his eyes flicking toward the door as if time was running out. He finally spoke, his voice low and tense, saying, "We didn't bring the axe to scare you, we brought it because someone followed us, someone dangerous, someone who wants something from us that we don't have." The room seemed to tilt slightly as the weight of his words settled into the space between us like a heavy fog. Emily wiped her face with her sleeve, her breath shaking as she said, "We heard footsteps behind the house, we saw shadows moving where they shouldn't be, and when we ran to the car we heard someone chasing us." Luke tightened his grip on the axe as if remembering the moment, and his shoulders tensed like he was preparing for another fight, another escape, another night of running from whoever hunted them. I stared at them, trying to understand how my daughter, who once dreamed of art school and peaceful summers, had ended up in a life where danger stalked her doorstep and fear lived inside her bones. The house felt smaller, and the walls seemed to press closer, as if listening to every word, preparing to hold secrets none of us were ready to face. Emily took my hand, her grip cold and desperate, and she whispered, "Mom, it started 3 weeks ago when we found something we were never supposed to find, and everything since then has gone wrong." The living room filled with the sound of the wind brushing against the windows, like fingers tapping lightly, warning us the night was not done with us. I felt the air change, a shift that crawled across my skin like electricity, and Luke turned sharply toward the hallway, his voice sharp, as he said, "Did you lock the back door?" Before I could answer, a faint sound drifted through the quiet, a soft, slow creak like a footstep on old wood, a sound none of us wanted to hear. Emily froze, her breath caught in her throat, her eyes wide with the realization that maybe they had not come here alone. My own heartbeat pounded so loud it felt like it echoed through the walls, and the truth became painfully clear. Whatever danger they had brought to my house had already arrived, had already slipped into the night around us, and was now somewhere close, watching, waiting, choosing its moment to strike. The fear that filled the room was thick, heavy, suffocating, and I knew that the story of this night was only just beginning. The sound settled into the silence of the house like a whisper that did not belong to any of us, and for a long moment none of us moved, none of us breathed, none of us dared to speak the fear that tightened around our throats. Emily clutched my arm so tightly her fingers shook against my skin, and I could feel how terrified she was, terrified in a way that came from weeks of running nights without sleep and secrets she could not carry alone anymore. Luke stepped forward, his boots pressing into the old wooden floor, his eyes sharp as he lifted the axe just slightly enough to show he was ready to defend us, but also afraid of what he might have to face. I felt the air grow colder, as if something unseen slipped through the cracks around us, something watching from the edges of the dark, waiting for a chance to step into the light. Emily whispered, "Mom, please tell me that was just the house, please tell me no one followed us here." Her voice trembled with a hope she already knew was impossible, and I wanted to lie to comfort her, but the truth sat heavy in my chest, the truth that danger had a way of finding those who feared it most. The hallway stretched before us, dark and narrow, the shadows deep enough to hide anything or anyone, and the creak we heard seemed to echo from somewhere inside that darkness. Luke motioned for us to stay back as he took a few careful steps forward, his breath tense, his grip tight enough to turn his knuckles pale in the dim light. Emily pulled me closer, holding on to me like she was afraid I might disappear, or she might fall apart if she let go, and I wrapped my arm around her, feeling the years of distance dissolve under the weight of the night. The house that had always been my sanctuary now felt foreign, like a place where every shadow hid a possibility of danger, where the memories on the walls watched silently, unable to protect us from what was coming. Luke stopped at the start of the hallway, lowering his voice as he said, "If someone is in here, they won't stay quiet for long." His words slid into the air heavy and certain, and Emily swallowed hard, her eyes wide with fear and something deeper, something like regret. The creak came again, softer this time, almost like the whisper of a shoe scraping gently across the floor, and all three of us turned toward the sound, our breaths tangled in the stillness. I felt my heart pounding so loud I wondered if whoever hid in my house could hear it trembling through the walls and floors. Emily whispered, "Mom, there is something you need to know, something we found, something we should have never touched, something they want back." Her voice broke as she spoke, and I could see her reliving whatever moment had changed everything in her life, whatever moment had forced them to run through the night to my door. Luke glanced back at us, his eyes hard, as he said, "We don't have time to explain, just stay behind me and stay quiet." But the fear in Emily's eyes demanded understanding, demanded truth, and I held her tighter, feeling her shaking like a leaf caught in a storm that refused to end. The hallway lights flickered suddenly, a brief soft pulse like a warning, like the house itself felt the danger creeping closer and wanted to speak but could only flicker in fear. Luke raised the axe again and stepped forward, and I watched the shape of his shadow stretch down the hallway, long and distorted like something from a nightmare. Emily leaned into me, whispering, "Mom, we never meant to take it, we never meant to get involved, but once we found it we couldn't put it back, and they knew we saw them, they knew we heard everything." Her words were desperate, filled with guilt and fear, and they twisted through my mind like vines tightening with every breath. Another creak echoed, but this time it came from deeper within the house, near the back door, the one I had forgotten to lock when panic took over. Luke turned sharply, his breath coming fast, as he said, "They're inside." The world seemed to collapse into that single moment, the fear, the truth, the danger, the realization that tonight was no longer about secrets or regrets. Tonight was about survival. The word inside hung in the air like smoke, thick and impossible to ignore, and for a moment everything in the house went still, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath, waiting for what would happen next. Emily gripped my hand, her fingers cold and trembling like she was holding on to the last solid thing in her world, and I felt the weight of every mistake I ever made as a mother pressing down on my chest. Luke moved slowly down the hallway, his steps careful, his shoulders tense, his body leaning forward like a man stepping into a battlefield he never wanted to fight on. The darkness near the back door felt heavier, darker, as if something was standing just beyond where the light reached, watching us with quiet, patient intent. My heart beat so loudly I could feel it in my throat, and Emily pressed closer to me, whispering, "Mom, we should have told you sooner, we should have come earlier, but we thought we could fix it, we thought we could escape it." Her voice cracked with guilt and fear, and I wanted to ask her what they found, what they saw, what they took, but the danger creeping through my home made questions feel like a luxury we no longer had. The house groaned as if something shifted inside the walls, and Luke tightened his grip on the axe, lifting it slightly, the blade catching the weak light like a silent warning. Emily swallowed hard, her eyes glowing with fear as she whispered, "They were not supposed to be there. We walked into something, they were doing something illegal, something dangerous, something they thought no one would ever discover." The words tangled in the air, and I felt a cold shiver move down my spine, as if the truth Emily carried was finally beginning to reveal its shadow. Luke stopped moving, lifting one hand to silence us, and in the quiet we heard it again, a faint slow breathing coming from the direction of the back door, steady, controlled, like someone trying not to be heard. Emily pressed her face against my shoulder, her breath shaking as she whispered, "Mom, they threatened us, they told us they would come for us if we ever spoke, if we ever told anyone what we saw." Her voice trembled with memories of fear and running and sleepless nights, and I wished with everything in me that I could turn back time, pull her out of whatever nightmare she had stepped into. Luke took another step, his boots creaking on the floor, and said, "Stay behind me no matter what you hear." The wind outside rattled the old windows, making the shadows flicker across the walls like hands reaching through the darkness. Emily whispered again, her voice breaking, "Mom, we didn't steal anything, we just found something. They dropped something important, something they need, and we thought it was nothing, but then everything went wrong." She squeezed my hand tighter as if the memory of what happened still clung to her skin, and I felt her body shaking with a fear she had been carrying far too long. Luke reached the end of the hallway and paused, his breath cold in the air, his eyes narrowed toward the back door as he whispered, "Someone is standing there." My body froze, every muscle stiffening, as if fear had wrapped its fingers around my spine and refused to let go. Emily buried her face against me, and I held her close, feeling her tremble like a small bird caught in a storm. The silence thickened, stretching across the hallway, until every second felt like a lifetime waiting to snap. Then, without warning, a shadow moved behind the frosted glass of the back door, slow, deliberate, sliding across the faint glow of the porch light outside. Emily gasped, her body jolting, and Luke stepped forward, raising the axe, his voice low and fierce as he whispered, "Show yourself." The shadow paused as if considering stepping into the light, and the air grew so heavy it felt like the entire house was sinking under the weight of something awful and undeniable. I felt Emily clutch me tighter, her breath thin, her heart pounding against my arm as she whispered, "Mom, they found us." The shadow behind the glass stopped moving, and the stillness that followed felt heavier than thunder hanging above a quiet town waiting to break open the sky. Emily clung to me, her breath shallow, her eyes wide with terror that had lived inside her for weeks, growing stronger with every step they took toward the truth they were never meant to see. Luke held the axe steady, though his hands trembled just enough for me to see that he was not fearless, only desperate, trying to protect a woman he loved from a danger far bigger than either of them understood. The air felt colder, the kind of cold that sinks into your bones and whispers that something dark is only inches away, watching, listening, choosing the moment to strike. I could feel my heartbeat in my neck, in my chest, in my fingertips, and every instinct inside me screamed to run, but my legs would not move, stuck in a fear I had never known before. Emily whispered, "Mom, please don't let them in, please don't let this be the end, please don't let them take us." Her voice was soft, breaking like glass under pressure, and I felt my own breath trembling as the reality of their nightmare settled deeper into my home. Luke inched closer to the door, his body angled to shield us, his shoulders tight with a fear he refused to show fully, even though the truth glimmered in his eyes. He whispered, "Whoever you are, step back from the door and show your hands." But the shadow did not move, it stood still like a figure carved from darkness, refusing to reveal itself, refusing to answer, refusing to leave. The porch light flickered and the shadow shifted just slightly enough for us to know it was alive, breathing, waiting. Emily pressed her forehead into my shoulder, whispering, "Mom, they are here because of the drive, the thing we found, the thing they want back." Her confession hung in the air, and I felt the pieces slowly forming a shape of danger and secrets that stretched far beyond anything I could have imagined. I whispered to her, "What drive? What did you find?" and her tears slipped down her face as she breathed out, "We found something on the ground outside their warehouse, something they dropped, something filled with names and numbers and secrets they cannot let anyone see." The words wrapped around us like a storm cloud, thick and charged, and Luke whispered sharply, "Emily, not now." But it was already too late. The truth was pouring out of her, a truth that had chased them across miles of dark roads and empty fields, and now straight into my home. Luke stepped closer to the door, lifting the axe higher as he called out again. I said, "Show yourself." The shadow moved this time, shifting to the side as if trying to find a new angle to watch us, and the quiet of the house filled with a tension so sharp it felt like it could cut through our skin. Emily sobbed quietly, pressing her hand to her mouth, as if trying to hold in every sound that might draw the danger closer. The back door's knob twitched just slightly, a tiny movement, but enough to send a shock through all of us like lightning striking dry ground. Luke lunged forward, grabbing the knob and twisting the lock tight, his voice rough with panic as he whispered they tried to open it. My blood ran cold and Emily held her breath, her whole body going stiff with terror. We heard it, then a quiet exhale on the other side of the door, as if whoever stood there was only inches away, breathing slow, controlled, waiting for the right moment. I felt my knees weaken, the fear too heavy, too real, and for the first time I understood that we were not dealing with ordinary criminals, we were dealing with people who had something to protect, something they were willing to kill for. Luke backed away slowly, keeping his eyes fixed on the door, and whispering, "They know we are in here." Emily sobbed softly into my shoulder, whispering, "Mom, I am so sorry." The wind outside rattled the porch steps, and another faint sound slid through the night, the sound of footsteps moving slowly around the back of the house. The danger was not at the door anymore, it was circling us. The footsteps outside moved with a slow, deliberate rhythm, like someone walking in a circle, tracing the edges of our fear, testing every weak point of the house, as if they had all the time in the world. Emily clung to me tighter, her breath shaking against my shoulder, and I felt the panic rolling off her in waves, carrying the weight of everything she had been hiding, everything she had been running from. Luke stepped backward, keeping his eyes on the door, his grip firm on the axe, though I could see the fear in the stiff way he held his shoulders, and the way his breath came too fast, too sharp. The porch boards groaned again, the sound stretching through the night like a warning that danger was no longer approaching, it was already here, surrounding us, closing in with each slow step. My house, the place where I spent years building quiet moments and lonely nights, now felt like a fragile shell, a thin layer between us and something vicious waiting to break through. Emily whispered, "Mom, they won't leave without the drive, and they think we still have it, and if they find out we lost it they will blame us, and they will make sure we never speak again." Her words chilled me because I could hear the truth in the tremble of her voice, the truth that these people were not thieves or wanderers, but something darker, something organized, something ruthless. Luke motioned for us to move back toward the center of the house, away from the doors and windows, his eyes darting around like he was mapping every possible escape route, though none seemed safe. We stepped quietly into the living room, the dim lamp casting long shadows across the floor, making everything look distorted and unfamiliar, like a nightmare version of the home I once knew. Emily's breathing grew uneven, and I placed my hand on her back, trying to steady her, though my own heart felt like it was trying to tear free from my chest. The footsteps paused right outside the kitchen window, the silence that followed so sharp it made my ears ring, like the world was holding itself still, bracing for something terrible. Luke raised the axe again, turning his body to shield us, and whispered, "Stay low, stay quiet." The floor felt cold beneath my feet, and the hairs on my arms rose as a faint tapping touched the glass, a slow, deliberate tap, tap, tap that felt more like a message than a threat. Emily whimpered quietly, pressing her hand against her mouth, and I felt her shaking like she was standing on the edge of a cliff, staring into something she could not escape. Another tap came, this one slower, like the person outside was waiting, savoring the fear they were creating, savoring the control they held over the room, over our breaths, over our hope. Luke moved closer to the window, his steps careful, his muscles tense, as he whispered, "Show your face." But the figure outside did not show themselves. Instead, the tapping stopped, and the footsteps began moving again, sliding around the side of the house toward the front porch, the same porch where Emily and Luke had appeared only moments before. Emily grabbed my hands, her voice a desperate whisper, "Mom, please listen, there is more you need to know about what we found. There is something we didn't tell the police because we were too scared." I stared at her, trying to keep my voice steady, as I whispered, "What did you see?" She trembled, her eyes filling with tears that glimmered in the dim light, and she whispered, "We saw them hurting someone, we saw them burying something, and we heard them talking about cleaning up loose ends." The words hit the air like a blade slicing through the thin layer of safety we pretended we still had, and I felt the fear settle deeper inside me, heavy and suffocating. Luke turned sharply toward us, his voice a rough whisper, "Emily, not now." But it was too late. The truth was spilling out, the truth that explained why they were hunted, why they were running, why danger had followed them straight into my quiet home. A sudden heavy thud hit the front porch, and the house shook slightly, as if something or someone had jumped onto the wooden boards with force and purpose. Emily gasped, and Luke lifted the axe higher, his voice tight, as he whispered, "They are at the front now." The danger was moving, closing in from every side, and we had nowhere left to run. The heavy thud on the front porch echoed through the quiet house like a warning drum, waking every fear in our bones, and the floor vibrated just enough for all three of us to feel the weight of whoever or whatever had landed outside. Emily pressed both hands against her ears as if the sound itself hurt her, and I could feel her entire body shaking against me, trembling like someone who had run out of places to hide. Luke moved toward the front hallway, each step slow, controlled, like a man walking into a storm he already knew he could not outrun, but still refusing to back down. The porch boards creaked under deliberate footsteps, the kind that carry confidence, the kind that say they are not afraid of being heard, the kind that belong to someone who believes the night belongs to them. I felt the air inside my house grow tighter, like the walls were shrinking inch by inch as danger pressed in from all sides, squeezing us into a smaller and smaller space. Emily whispered, "Mom, they said they would come for us, they said they don't leave witnesses, they said anyone who knows anything will disappear." Her voice broke at the last word, the fear too heavy for her to hide, and I wrapped my arm around her, wishing I could pull her out of this nightmare, wishing she had never gotten close to the truth she now carried like a curse. Luke turned his head slightly, his voice low, as he whispered, "They are not knocking this time, they are planning to break in." The wind outside swept across the porch, and then another thud hit the door, this time harder, deeper, like a boot testing the frame, testing how strong it was, testing how long it would hold. Emily jumped and let out a soft cry, and the sound filled the living room like a spark catching dry wood, spreading panic in every corner of the space. Luke raised the axe higher, positioning himself between us and the front hallway, his back straight, his breath steadying, as if preparing for the moment the door gave way. I listened to the footsteps shifting just outside my door, and something about the pattern felt wrong, too calm, too patient, like the person outside was not in a hurry, like they were waiting for something to happen inside. Emily wiped her tears, but they kept falling, her voice quiet, as she whispered, "Mom, we tried to turn the drive in, but the person we gave it to never showed up at the meeting spot, and after that everything felt wrong." The porch boards creaked again, and then suddenly stopped, and the silence turned thick like the world had paused, standing on the edge of something irreversible. Luke whispered, "They are listening." The thought chilled me because I realized whoever stood outside was not just hunting, they were calculating, reading every sound, every movement inside my home. The doorknob rattled slowly, turning, then stopping, then turning again, as if someone was testing how much resistance they would face if they decided to force it. Emily squeezed my hand and whispered, "Mom, I think they know we are all in here." Her voice trembled, and I could hear the defeat creeping into it, the realization that the danger was not going away, that it had followed them, too close, too determined, too merciless. A deep breath echoed from the other side of the door, the kind of breath someone takes before making a decision, before choosing violence, before stepping into the role of a hunter. Luke stepped closer, tightening his grip on the axe, as he whispered, "They're about to break in." The doorknob twisted again, this time harder, and the tension in the air snapped like a wire pulled too tight. Emily buried her face against me, and I held her close, feeling her heart race against my chest, and I whispered into her hair, "You are safe, stay with me, stay with me." But even as I spoke, the door shook violently, as if someone slammed their shoulder into it, testing how much force it would take to break through. Luke positioned his feet wider, bracing himself, ready to swing, ready to defend us, ready to face whatever danger stood inches away. A second blow hit the door, louder, stronger, splintering a small crack near the frame. Emily cried out, and the sound tore through me because I knew the truth now. They were not trying to scare us anymore. They were trying to get in. The house felt different as I stepped back inside, like the walls were holding their breath and waiting for me to notice what I had ignored for so many years, and I could feel a strange heaviness settle over my shoulders, as though the night itself was trying to warn me that the truth was finally close. And I walked slowly through the hallway, feeling the cold wooden floor beneath my feet, and remembering the uneasy look on my daughter's face when she stood at my door, with that axe gripped so tightly in her trembling hands. And the more I replayed that moment, the clearer it became that she was not trying to hurt me, she was trying to protect herself from something she could not speak about, something that followed her, something that made her run here in the middle of the night. And I felt my breath grow shallow as I realized how blind I had been for years, choosing comfort over reality, pretending the strange sounds in the house were nothing more than old pipes and settling wood, pretending her childhood fears were only imagination, pretending the darkness in the corners never felt like it was watching me, even when I told myself to stop thinking that way. And now, standing in the quiet hallway with only the dim porch light slipping through the window, I understood that everything I tried to forget was returning tonight, and there was no avoiding it anymore. And I moved toward the living room, where the shadows stretched across the floor like long fingers pulling me deeper, and I remembered the times my daughter told me that she heard whispers in her old bedroom, and how she refused to sleep alone when she was younger, and I always brushed it off, saying she was dreaming or exaggerating, because I wanted to believe this house was safe and peaceful and normal. But the truth was, I heard things too, and I saw movement in places where nothing should have been moving, and I felt cold spots in warm rooms, and sometimes I woke up with a sense that someone had been standing at my door watching me breathe. And now those memories came crashing back all at once, like the house was reminding me that I had ignored its warnings for far too long. And I felt a deep ache in my chest as I thought about my daughter running here, terrified and desperate, because whatever had followed her had grown stronger and bolder, and now it was inside this house with us, waiting for me to face what I had been running from for years. And as I looked toward the dark end of the hallway, I felt something shift in the air, and I knew without understanding how that the night was only beginning, and that everything would change before the sun rose again. The night stretched around us, heavy and endless, like a shadow that refused to leave, and every sound, every creak, every whisper in the house carried a weight I could not ignore, as if the walls themselves were holding secrets too dangerous to speak aloud. And Emily clung to me, her trembling body pressed close, her breath warm and fast against my chest, and I could feel her fear like a living thing crawling through the room. And Luke stood rigid with the axe held tight, his eyes scanning every shadow, every corner, every inch of the house, as if expecting danger to erupt from the walls at any moment. And the silence between each sound was sharper than anything I had ever felt, and I realized the danger was not just outside, it had slipped inside, it followed them here, and it was patient, waiting for us to make a mistake, waiting for one wrong breath, one wrong move to strike. And I thought of every time I had told myself that nothing could happen here, that the world outside was safe, and that my family would always be protected. And now I knew how fragile all those lies had been, and the air grew colder, the shadows deeper, as if the house had become alive, trying to warn us, trying to make us understand that the night was no longer ours to control. And Emily whispered, "Mom, they are everywhere, they know everything, they won't stop until they get it." And I held her tighter, feeling her heart racing against mine, and I whispered, "You are safe with me," and I meant it, even though my chest ached with fear and uncertainty. And Luke stepped forward, blocking the path to the front door, his body tense, his eyes hard as steel, ready for whatever came next. And a low scraping sound came from the hallway, the sound of something moving slowly, deliberately, and I could see Emily's face pale as she buried it in my shoulder, and I felt the fear tighten like a knot around my ribs, and then a shadow moved in the corner of the living room just beyond the dim lamplight, and I realized whoever was here was not human, or at least not acting like it. They were calculating, measuring us like prey before the strike, and Luke whispered, "Stay behind me, no matter what you hear, no matter what you see," and I nodded my head, trying to calm Emily, whose whole body shook with terror, and the shadow stopped for a moment as if aware of our presence, aware that we had seen it, and then it lunged toward the front door, smashing the frame, splintering wood, sending splinters across the floor, and we screamed as the door gave way and Luke swung the axe with all his strength, hitting the intruder, and I pulled Emily back, and we ran toward the back hallway, toward the rooms where we could lock ourselves in, and the figure outside roared or hissed some sound that made the air itself tremble, and the house seemed to vibrate under its force, and we barricaded ourselves inside the guest room, closing the door, slamming it with every ounce of strength we had, and we could hear heavy footsteps circling outside, pounding against walls and windows, shaking the floor, and I held Emily, whispering, "Stay calm, stay with me, you are safe, I promise you are safe," and Luke stood by the door, ready with the axe, ready to fight for every second to keep us alive, and outside the chaos continued, the air filled with the sound of metal striking wood and shouts, and a strange low growl that made my blood run cold, and hours passed like minutes, every second stretching into eternity, every sound a warning that we were not alone, and then just as suddenly as it began, the noise stopped, the shadow vanished, leaving the house cold, silent, tense, like it was holding its breath, and Luke opened the door, slowly peeking outside, and I held Emily close, her hands gripping mine, her body still shaking but alive, and we stepped outside into the first pale light of dawn, and the street was empty, the danger gone for now. But I knew we had survived only by a thread, that our lives had changed forever, and Emily whispered, "Mom, thank you," and I held her tight, knowing that no matter what had come, we had faced it together, and the night behind us would never be forgotten, but we were still here, alive together, and that was enough.